Those are booklets that go along with what we're doing here. A booklet called Why that goes through the metaphysics of Genesis. And I noticed you have Charles Fillmore's book,
Yeah, I've had it for a while.
which is a good one. It's a textbook. It's kind of hard to sit down and just read because it really goes into all the details behind in the Gospel of, in the book of Genesis. And the other book that is a little easier to read and really covers the whole Old Testament. It's called Let There Be Light by Elizabeth Sand Turner, who was a Bible instructor at Unity School back in the 60s. And she came up with a series of books, Let There Be Light, Be Ye Transformed, and what's the last one? Anyway, three of them that cover the Old Testament, the Gospels, and the book of Revelation, as well as, the rest of the New Testament.
You had that book in here?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's listed in there.
I'll write it down.
Right. And so we're starting a new series today on new beginnings, if you will. Starting over again. It's always good to start over. And we can start over at any time. You know, every day we have a new opportunity to begin again, if you will, or to start anew. And every minute of every day, if we find ourselves in a spot which we don't want to be in, we can just start over again. Mentally, emotionally, physically, whatever it is that we find ourselves in. And so we're looking over at these stories. Now, this is every culture has their beginning stories, their cosmology, how things came to be. And one of the ways I address this book of Genesis, at least especially the first half of it, has to do with their stories, their teaching stories that came out of our desire as a race, as we became aware of ourselves as individuals, and we began to talk and create language and speak about things. Well, the questions started coming up of, how did we get to be who we are? Why are we here? How did the universe come to be? Why do we do the things that we do? Especially in the Jewish culture, why do we have the different celebrations that we do? And that was a lot of the questions that were being asked. This was formulated during a period of time when they were mostly nomadic and sitting around, or even if they were, situated in a locale, they had, they would sit around the campfire at night and tell stories, and the children would ask questions, and so we have this. In every culture, we have this growing awareness of a cosmology, if you will, or how things began, how the universe came to be, and all the different stories around that. In the Greeks are the one that gave us the idea of chaos, the word chaos, which literally means a yawning nothingness. A yawning nothingness. Now, we know that's not necessarily how we normally think of chaos these days. We mostly think of chaos as being a mess. That things are happening and nobody really knows, nobody's in charge, and things are just falling apart. That's chaos. And to a certain extent, if you think in terms of yawning nothingness, of the chaos of our political situation right now, you realize that it is a yawning nothingness, right? The chaos is really a yawning nothingness. There's nothing really there, nothing really going on, and yet there's a lot of hullabaloo about it. A lot of yelling and screaming and pointing of fingers and all that sort of thing. So, that's what chaos. That's what Gaia. The earth came out of chaos. That's the Greek myth that goes back 1,000 years before Jesus, more than 1,000 years before Jesus. The Babylonians had their watery chaos, a separation that time begins when heaven and earth are separated, that they become separated. It's kind of like in the beginning stories of the book of Genesis, where the earth was without form and void, and all the darkness, came the Spirit, and let there be light. And then there was the firmament of the heavens on the second day. You know, so we have a parallel with the Egyptians, the Babylonians as well, in that the earth coming out of the watery chaos. And we also have a parallel in the number 7. And there were 7 tablets of the beginnings. They call it the Enuma Elis. It's their creative stories, the stories of creation. And there's 7 tablets, whereas in the book of Genesis we have 7 days. So there's a parallel there. If we look back to the Sumerians, which is one of the oldest cultures of civilization that we're aware of, anyway. We've heard about others possibilities like Atlantis, and others possibilities of civilizations prior to the Samaritans, and we really have very little in writing from them. They had a cuneiform style of writing on tablets, and the tablets pretty much all turned to dust by now. But there's a few scattered parts that seem to show a parallel to this creation story, that they had this creation myth of God creating through a series of steps the universe out of nothing. The Hopi Indians have their stories of the Tawa, the creator spirit, who formed the first world out of endless space or out of nothing, and that this is the 4th world to be inhabited by our creations, because each time things get bad enough, the good people, the good spirits, go on to the next world and everybody else is left behind. So we're into the 4th world at this point. And the Egyptians, which were very, the Babylonians, of course, were during that period of captivity, around 700 to 500 BC. There was the direct influence of the Babylonians upon the Israelites. And even prior to that, while Joseph had taken the Israelites into Egypt, there was the influences of the Egyptians, who said that the world emerged from an infinite lifeless sea when the sun rose for the first time. So when Ra first appears, when the sun god first comes out and creates light, then the earth is formed. And if we think of the first day of creation, let there be light, Ra, sun. Second day of creation, the firmament comes out of the heavens. And so we have direct parallels. There's quite a few, and we could go over culture after culture after culture and see the influences that helped shape and form the stories that were being told. Now, the cultural influences, how much of this was directly related, and how much is it just just a consciousness that's in the air, so to speak, that we don't necessarily have to have direct connection in order to share these common stories or to share common myths and traditions. There's the Navajo Indians have a sand painting tradition that goes back thousands of years, where they take different colored sands and they create these intricate patterns. And then when they're done, they dance on it, basically just scatter it with their dancing. Now the Buddhists in India, half a world away, have a sand painting tradition. I don't know if you've ever experienced their sand painting tradition. They came to Portland, Oregon when I was living there. And they spent 2 weeks creating this huge mandala that must have been at least 20 feet in diameter. And it was just intricately placing these sand grains. They would take the different colors of sand, and they had this like little funnel, and they put out these little lines. And it was a meditation for 2 weeks that they created this mandala. And when they were done, they swept it all up into a bucket and threw it into the Willamette River. Because it wasn't about creating something that was going to last. It was about the experience. And it's the same with the Hopi Indians, the Navajos have essentially the same tradition. So there is a connection that exceeds the physical. We don't have to be in physical connection in order to share traditions or to share ideas or to share the spirit, if you will. So the mysteries, we're talking about the mysteries of Genesis. The mysteries is that metaphysical realm, that which is above and beyond the physical. metaphysics, above and beyond the physics, the physical realm. And so we're looking at this at a metaphysical level. What is it that these stories which have shaped and formed so much of Western society, the Judeo-Christian traditions, and try to come into some kind of an understanding. I have a lot of rabbinical friends, people that I've talked to and spent some time with and studied with, and almost without fail, one of them will say something about, they will say something about how it's so amazing how Christians tend to, the New Testament is the Christian Bible, right? That's supposed to be, and yet they tend to spend most of their time in the Old Testament, right? Yeah. Talking about Leviticus and the prohibitions and that, just they say, why don't they stay with their own Bible? Number one, it's not their Bible. Number two, they don't understand it. Because in the Jewish tradition, they know that these stories are not meant to be literal history. They know that these are teaching stories. Even, and they know that even the more modern stories, when we get into a time when they were keeping contemporaneous records, like the time of David, etc., the Judges and David and on through there, when we have a more contemporaneous record, we believe, at least began. There was some level of historicity to these, and there's some level of historicity to in the book of Genesis as well. We know Abraham. We have some belief in Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and that these stories coming into shape. It was Moses was supposedly the one who wrote these books, the first 5 books known as the Pentateuch, which is like Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Those first 5 books of the Bible were supposedly written by Moses, which is a little interesting to understand because they start long before he was born. He was born while they were in captivity in Egypt, and continues on beyond his death, because he dies up on the goes up onto Mount Horeb, the holy mountain, and he's allowed to see into the promised land, yet he doesn't enter into the promised land. So it records his own death. So there's so it came out of the tradition. Now, who actually wrote these? There's many different authors. We could talk, if we really wanted to get into a scholarly discussion, we could talk about the J writer and the P writer and the E writer, and then there's the editors, but that's not what we're here looking at. We're not looking at it from that kind of a scholarly point of view, but we're looking at it from a metaphysical, which in unity means looking at it from a point of view of how is this reflective of my growth in consciousness, my soul's journey, my soul's unfoldment. And we're looking at it from the perspective of not only is this history or his story, the story of God and our conscious awareness of God, it's not only a moral teaching in, we have the 10 Commandments and the other prohibitions, etc., that show up in the Old Testament. It's not only a moral teaching, but it is a life lesson teaching about our conscious evolution. It's not only his story, but it's our story. So we can look at the whole book the whole 39 books of the Old Testament and of the New Testament, and on through Revelations as the story of our soul unfolded from when we were without form and void, without any conscious awareness, where we become into conscious awareness and become aware of ourselves as individuals. We develop in consciousness through all the different stages, and a lot of that is in the book of Genesis. And we'll look at, it goes on into the book of Judges and Kings and on through the book of Revelation. But much of the prehistory is talking about our soul involvement up to the time where we really became aware of ourselves as conscious beings and able to influence our world, if you will, consciously. So we go from being totally unconscious in the presence of God, to where we experience a certain level of separation in consciousness, to where we come back into a conscious awareness of God, a total conscious awareness of the presence and the power of God or greatness within us. So in the book of Genesis, it starts, let me see if I've covered everything here. That's in the introduction to our little pamphlet, our booklet, I should say. And it gives an outline of where we're going over this 12 sessions. Covers the whole book of Genesis in 12 sessions. And in part 1 here, it's called In the Beginning God. If we understood just these 4 words from the very beginning of our Bible, we could transform our lives. In the beginning, God. When our lives are not what they could be, when they could use more life in our lives, when prosperity and abundance, health and wholeness, loving, caring, sharing, personal relationships. In the beginning, God. Put God first. Spirit, truth, love, good first in your mind and heart, and all these things shall be added unto you. Put God first. So if we just add these first 4 words of the Bible, we just have to remember God. Now, how do we conceive of God? Now that we're coming into nobody understands God. So when I say, how do you understand God? I'm just saying, what is your current level of understanding? We covered not too long ago talking about the dimensions of consciousness, and by the time we get to the 4th dimension of consciousness, we begin to see time and space from the level of time and space. We see space in 3 dimensions, and we see that the circle of life that we seem to be going around is not just a circle, but a spiral. And each time we come around the circle, we are at a higher level. So every time we look at this particular material, whether it's the Bible, or whether it's A Course in Miracles, or whether it's some other spiritually inspired writings, Charles Fillmore's books, Emily Cady's books, Elizabeth Sand Turner's books, Myrtle Fillmore's books, any spiritually inspired material, we come at it from a different level. So a different awareness and consciousness, and we're continuing to grow. So one of the things I like to say is that, we're never going to be woke. There's that new term, being woke, I'm woke. Well, we're never going to be woke. We're going to be, we wake up to the fact that there's a greater level of wokeness to be. So we're continually awakening. And so that's what we're doing. We're awakening anew, brand new. In the beginning, God created the heavens, the earth. Now, is this the beginning of history, of time? That's not necessarily, what was before the beginning? That's a question that doesn't get answered. God was before the beginning. Good orderly direction. That's how I conceive of God. That's one of the highest awarenesses of God that I have. Good orderly direction. I believe in divine order and divine timing. That as long as I'm doing what I should be doing, as long as I'm helping others and being involved in the studies, and I'm not doing what I'm not supposed to be doing, which gets us into the 8 limbs of yoga once again, Stop doing what we're not supposed to be doing and start doing what we're supposed to be doing. Those are the first 2 limbs of Raja Yoga. So as we look at, as long as we are making progress, if you will, then it all will work together for good. That's the words of the Apostle Paul. All things work together for good for those who love God and are called according to His purpose. So as long as we are following through on our purpose, which is to express God, to express good in our lives. How are we expressing good in our lives? And as long as we're making progress in that direction, then all things will work together for good in our lives. Is it the beginning of time or of history? No, it's the beginning of our story. The beginning of our co-creation with the power that is God. And what did this power create the heavens and the earth out of? In the beginning, God. All is of God / good. We know that everything works, that in everything God works for good. That's from Romans 8:28. What did God create the heavens and the earth out of? In the beginning, God. It's the beginning of our story, the beginning of our co-creation with the power that is God's. This is the beginning of our awakening. So there's Charles Fillmore talks about the spiritual creation and the spiritual or mental creation, and then also about the physical creation. So there's at least two creation stories. There's the 7 days of creation, which are normally considered the first creation story, and then there is what Charles Fillmore calls the manifestation stories, which is the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve, and who were in the garden, and the eating of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And I actually see that and he talks about how that the Bible is threefold, just as we are threefold: spirit, soul, and body, or mind, body, spirit. That the Bible has this 3 parts to it, and that God creates and God ideates, if you will, and that man thinks, or that man co-creates, and that we co-create through our process of thinking. It says the first chapter shows 2 parts of the Trinity, mind and idea in mind, and in the second chapter we have the third part, manifestation. So really, we have 2 creation stories in this first chapter. The first one is what we just read. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and the Spirit of God moved across the waters. Let me get it just right here. And let's see, here we go. And the darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the face of the water. So spiritual creation is that the Spirit of God begins to move within us. That's the beginning point for the creation process, is that Spirit of God moving within us. Because it is. The God Spirit is the motivating force within us. Another interpretation for this, the word that is interpreted as spirit, which is ruach, is breath. That the breath of God. So when it talks about here the Spirit of God, it's the same word in chapter 2 where it says God breathed into the man the breath of life, and man became a living being. That's the same word, ruach. At one point it's breath, and another it's spirit. So that very breath that we breathe is that Spirit of God within us. And when we awaken to that, when we start this awakening process, which is the 7 days or the 7 steps of creation, then we are in that process of co-creation. That's the mental, as he talks about here, the 2 ideas, parts of the Trinity, the mind and the idea in mind. That we are that divine idea of creation, of the sonship, if you will. And that we come in and then we make it manifest in the second chapter. So we look at the 7 days that represent 7 steps in the formative process. Some people say 6, some say 7, because the 7th day, it says that is the day of rest, of completion. It's the Sabbath. And Charles Fillmore, in his book Mysteries of Genesis, gives us these in short form. And I give it to you in short form. He goes into much more detail about these 7 days. And the first day is let there be light, which it represents intelligence or illumination, to be enlightened, to be awakened, if you will. The second day we have the firmament of heaven being formed in the waters. And here he says it's the faith faculty being enlightened, if you will. So the light is shining on our faith and our faith in God. And that is the firm ground upon which we stand, our faith. The third day we have the seed-bearing plants being created. And this is the faculty of imagination, our ability to see beyond appearances, to see the reality of God, to see the reality of good, to see the reality of divinity, of spirit, within the manifestation. So what doesn't matter what's going on around us, we have these seeds. It's like the yin and the yang. I often throw that out, the yin and the yang, which has the yin has the seed of the yang, and the yang has the seed of the yin within it, represented by the swirling forms of black and white that intertwine each other, and within the black is a dot of white, and within the white was a dot of black. So it's all intertwined. And those are the seeds of possibility. Then the fourth day we have the creation of the sun and the moon, which we're told is our understanding and our will. So the understanding, it's one thing to have an understanding, but without the willpower to carry it through, it's ineffective. And will without the understanding is destructive. So willpower without an understanding. So we see people, in power who don't have an understanding of divine order and divine timing, who decide to make things happen in their own way and in their own timing, and we see a lot of destruction happening without the understanding. That's why when I talk, with churches, when I talk with boards and talking about the law of cause and effect, of action and reaction, that I always suggest that actions be taken over an extended process, that we just don't make major changes today. Because if you make major changes in a nonprofit group, in a organization, you're going to get an equal and opposite reaction. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And so if you make a fast change, you're going to get a fast reaction. If you make a slow, calculated, everybody's involved in the process kind of change, and then it goes much more smoothly and much more accepting and much more, everybody goes along with it for the most part. You can when everybody's involved in the process. So the understanding, the will. And on the fifth day, we have the animals being formed after their kind. This is the faculty of discrimination, of being able to determine, what is good and healthy, and what is not good and healthy. Determine, what is, being able what's the word? Discrimination means to be able to see differences, and to know what is right and what is wrong, and what is good and what is bad, what is like, what is good for, and then when I say right and wrong, I mean that which is helpful and that which is not helpful or hurtful. Then we have, on the sixth day, we have the male and female being created, man being created, male and female, and symbolizing those spiritual faculties of wisdom and love. And again, wisdom and love, very similar to understanding and will, they have to be in balance, because wisdom without love is cold and calculating, and love without wisdom is can be destructive, and it can be lost without any being ineffectual. And then the seventh day, God rested from all that He had done, and He completed completion and release. So there was this element of completion on the seventh day, as well as a relaxation, and releasing and letting it go. So we do what is ours to do, and then we let it go. It's not about the results, it's about being integrous in the process. So as we live our lives, it's not about what we accomplish, but how we live our lives.
It's not winning and losing.
It's not winning and losing, it's how you play the game, which really counts. To some people, winning and losing is all there is, and so that's what they get. They get that feeling of, I'm a winner, but then, they're only...
Who remembers that?
Yeah, who remembers... yeah. So it's the process, that counts. I'm just, that always the story of Arjuna sticks out in my mind. The Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna, is out in the middle of the field preparing for battle. That's how the book begins. And he's looking across the battlefield, and he sees his uncles and cousins and brothers, and he looks behind him at the other side, and he sees his uncles and brothers and cousins, and he's like, how can I fight this battle? I'd rather just lay down my arms. And Krishna, his charioteer, has this long discussion, and the essence of it is it's not about the outcome. It's about how we doing what is ours to do, essentially. So what is ours to do? Now the battle is not an outer physical battle with other people, but an inner mental and emotional battle with ourselves. And most Indians are pretty clear on that. Gandhi was very clear on that this was an inner struggle and it wasn't an outer. It was not a historical tale in the sense, that Arjuna, that there really was this battle in Arjuna, but it was an inner battle with ourselves, that all these thoughts and feelings and things that are going within us are our brothers and cousins and uncles, and are part of us. and which ones shall we keep? I like the story of the white wolf and the gray wolf that comes out of the native tradition. And the young man goes to the chief, and he says, "Oh, I've got this white wolf on one shoulder that tells me all the good, to do all these good things and be helpful, and I got this black wolf or gray wolf on my other shoulder that wants to be selfish and self-centered and to take from other people and be cruel. And I don't know which one's going to win." And the chief says to him, "Which one are you feeding?" And so our job is to feed the white wolf, to do what is ours to do. That we have all those different parts of us, from culture, from history, from parents and everything else, from the mistaken ideas that we've been grown up with, and it's ours to awaken to and to continue to awaken to ourselves as co-creators with God, and that this creative process is ours to use in our lives, for ourselves individually and as we outpicture and express in our life. So the spiritual reality is coming into being through you and I, through this creative process, and that's our opportunity. Thank you, God, and so it is.